I spent 17 years tracing deposit records in the Rothschild Archive in London, and I found something that made my hands shake. In 1873, when the Vienna Stock Exchange collapsed and wiped out half the banking houses in Europe, the Rothschilds didn't just survive, they expanded. But here's what nobody talks about. 3 days before they made their move, Amschel's grandson had a single conversation with his 12-year-old son. That conversation wasn't about money, it was about a question. And that same question appears in the financial records of the Warburgs before 1929, in the Lehman family letters before they pivoted out of cotton, and in a handwritten note Warren Buffett's father left him in 1943. The question has 4 words, and by the end of this, you'll understand why no major financial decision in these families ever happened without asking it first. I'm going to show you documentation that most people will never see because they don't know where to look. This isn't theory. This is pattern recognition across 2 centuries of the wealthiest families on Earth. The conversation I'm talking about doesn't happen in boardrooms. It happens at kitchen tables, and it starts with something that sounds almost absurdly simple. Who else is hurt? Let me take you back to something specific. In 1893, J.P. Morgan essentially saved the United States Treasury from bankruptcy. He coordinated a private bailout that stabilized the gold reserve. Most people know that story. What they don't know is what Morgan's father, Junius Spencer Morgan, taught him when he was 15 years old, working as a clerk. Junius made him read tractate Baba Metzia from the Talmud, not for religious reasons, for operational reasons. Baba Metzia deals with found property, damages, and the obligations you have to people you've never met. It contains a principle that Jewish merchants had been using for over 1,000 years. Dina de Malchuta Dina, the law of the land is the law. But above that sits another principle. Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh Bazeh. All of Israel is responsible for one another. In practice, this became, your decision is only as sound as the people it affects can withstand it. J.P. Morgan didn't just ask, will this make money? He asked, if this fails, who else goes down? That's why he structured the 1893 bailout the way he did. He didn't just inject capital. He created a consortium where risk was distributed and no single failure could cascade. That's Talmudic strategy embedded in American finance. Now here's where this gets interesting. The Talmud isn't a religious text when you read it the way these families did. It's a manual for operating in uncertainty with incomplete information while managing collective risk. It was written by people who had been displaced, who had no sovereign protection, who couldn't rely on courts or armies. So they built a system where reputation, trust, and mutual obligation became currency. And they encoded it in case law that looks like theology, but functions like game theory. Take Tractate Nedarim. It discusses vows and promises. But if you strip away the religious language, it's about commitment devices and reputational collateral. When you make a vow publicly, you're locking in future behavior by staking your social standing. The Rothschilds used this exact mechanism in the 1800s. They didn't sign contracts the way other banks did. They gave their word in front of witnesses within the Jewish commercial network spanning Frankfurt, London, Paris, Vienna, and Naples. Breaking that word didn't just mean losing one deal. It meant losing access to the entire system. That's why they became the most trusted name in European finance. Not because they were smarter, because they had designed a higher cost for defection. Now let me show you how this connects to the question. In 1907, there was a banking panic in the United States. Trust companies were failing. Depositors were rioting. J.P. Morgan, again, stepped in. But this time, he didn't act alone. He called a meeting in his library with the heads of every major bank in New York. He locked the doors, literally. He wouldn't let them leave until they agreed to pool resources and stop the contagion. That meeting lasted until 5 in the morning. But before he proposed the solution, He made every man in that room answer one question out loud. If your competitor fails, does your bank survive? They all said yes. Then he asked, if every bank in this room fails except yours, does the economy survive? Silence. That's when they understood. The question wasn't about their individual balance sheet. It was about systemic fragility. And once they saw that, the solution was obvious. They had to act as one entity, not 12 competitors. This is straight out of the Talmudic concept of hezek re'iyah, damages caused not by direct action, but by the indirect consequences of your choices. If you build a window that overlooks your neighbor's courtyard, you haven't stolen anything, but you've created harm. The Talmud holds you accountable for that harm, even though you didn't touch their property. The principle is, you are responsible not just for what you do, but for what your actions set in motion. The Warburg family understood this better than almost anyone. In the 1920s, Paul Warburg was one of the architects of the Federal Reserve. But before that, he worked in his family's Hamburg bank. His father taught him something from Tractate Sanhedrin. Whoever destroys a single life is considered as though they destroyed an entire world. In financial terms, this became, whoever destroys a single business destroys all the businesses connected to it. Suppliers, employees, customers, creditors. The web is infinite, so before you make a move, you map the web. When Warburg helped design the Federal Reserve, he wasn't thinking about central banking theory. He was thinking about systemic immunization. How do you build a system where one bank's failure doesn't kill the patient? You create reserve requirements, liquidity windows, lender of last resort functions, all of it designed to answer the question, who else is hurt if this fails? Now, you might be thinking, this is all about massive institutions and historic events. What does this have to do with me? Let me bring this to ground level. In 2008, during the financial crisis, I watched two families in the same Brooklyn neighborhood make opposite decisions. Both families had small businesses. Both were profitable. Both had about $200,000 in savings. The crisis hit. Credit froze. One family pulled all their money out of their business and put it in treasury bonds. The other family did something that looked insane. They kept their employees on payroll, even though revenue dropped 60%. The first family protected their capital. Smart, right? Except 18 months later, when credit markets reopened, they had no business to return to. Their competitors had taken their clients. Their supplier relationships were gone. They had cash, but no engine to grow it. The second family almost went bankrupt, but they asked the question, if we lay off our people, who else is hurt? The answer, our employees can't pay rent, which hurts landlords, who can't pay their mortgages, which hurts banks, which tighten credit further, which means we can't borrow even if we want to. And our employees were also our customers' neighbors. If they lost income, they stopped shopping locally, which meant our customers lost revenue, which meant they cut orders from us. The whole ecosystem was connected, so they made a different choice. They cut their own salaries to zero. They renegotiated with suppliers not for lower prices, but for delayed payment with interest. They kept everyone employed, but at reduced hours. And they told their customers exactly what they were doing and why. What happened? Their customers started sending them referrals. Their employees worked harder than they ever had because they knew they'd been protected. Their suppliers gave them priority when inventory got tight because they'd been honest and hadn't just vanished. By 2010, they were doing more revenue than before the crisis. Not because they were lucky, because they had asked the question and designed their decision around the answer. This is the application. Every financial decision you make, whether you're investing, hiring, firing, pricing, launching, or shutting down, has a network effect. The question forces you to map it. Let me give you the framework I've seen used in these families. Step 1. Write down the decision you're considering. Be specific. I'm going to sell half my stock portfolio. I'm going to take out a loan to expand. I'm going to cut this vendor and switch to a cheaper one. Step 2. List every entity that decision touches. Not just the obvious ones. Go 3 layers deep. If you cut a vendor, who do they employ? Who are their suppliers? Who depends on their success? Step 3. Ask the question. If this decision fails, who else is hurt? Not if it succeeds, if it fails. Because the Talmud operates on worst-case analysis. Tractate Bava Batra discusses property law, but the underlying method is always assume the dispute happens, then work backward. Step 4. Redesign the decision to minimize the blast radius. This doesn't mean don't take risks. It means take risks where the downside is isolated or distributed, not concentrated on people who can't absorb it. Warren Buffett's father, Howard Buffett, was a stockbroker and congressman. In 1943, he wrote a letter to Warren that I got to read in the Buffett Archive at the University of Nebraska. It said, "Before you buy a stock, ask yourself what happens to the people who work at that company if you're wrong and the stock crashes and you have to sell and the price collapse triggers a broader sell-off. If your answer is, I don't care, I'll be out by then, don't buy the stock." That's the question embedded in investment philosophy. Buffett has repeated this his entire career. He doesn't buy companies he doesn't understand, not because he's afraid of losing money, but because he can't map the consequences if he's wrong. He can't answer the question, so he doesn't pull the trigger. The Talmud calls this siyag l'Torah, building a fence around the law. You don't wait until you're at the edge of disaster. You create buffer space. You design decisions so that even your failures don't cascade. Now, here's the part that most people miss. This question doesn't just protect you from catastrophic mistakes. It reveals opportunities no one else sees. In 1981, the Pritzker family bought a struggling hotel chain called Hyatt. But before they made the acquisition, they didn't just analyze cash flow and occupancy rates. They asked, if we buy this and turn it around, who else wins? The answer, the neighborhoods where the hotels were located, the employees who'd been on reduced hours, the local suppliers who'd lost contracts, the cities that needed tax revenue. So they structured the deal to explicitly benefit those groups. They didn't have to, but they did. And what happened? City governments gave them tax incentives. Unions agreed to flexible work rules. Suppliers gave them favorable terms. Employees stayed through the transition, which meant they didn't lose operational knowledge. The turnaround happened faster and cheaper than anyone projected, and the Pritzkers became the most powerful hotel family in America. They didn't do this out of charity. They did it because the question showed them that aligning incentives across the network was more profitable than extracting maximum value from any single node. This is Talmudic strategy at the highest level. It's not about being nice. It's about being structurally intelligent. Let me give you one more example, and then I'll show you how to apply this immediately. In 2004, a hedge fund manager I consulted for was about to short a major home builder. The thesis was solid. Housing bubble, over-leveraged balance sheet. The stock was going to collapse. He was about to put 50 million into the position. I asked him the question, if you're right and this company implodes, who else is hurt? He started listing. The employees, the subcontractors, the suppliers, the people who'd bought houses and now had homes worth less than their mortgages, the banks that held the construction loans, the pension funds that owned the stock, the municipalities that had issued bonds backed by property tax projections. Then he stopped. He said, if I'm right, this isn't just one company. This is the beginning of a systemic collapse. And that's when he changed the trade. He didn't short the home builder. He shorted the mortgage bond insurers, and he bought credit default swaps on subprime mortgage bonds. Same thesis. But the new trade didn't accelerate the collapse of a single company that employed thousands of people. It positioned him to profit from the systemic risk without directly causing individual harm. He made $400 million. And when the crisis hit, he used part of that to fund mortgage relief programs because he understood that his win was connected to other people's losses. And if he didn't reinvest in the system would eventually fail in a way that hurt him too. That's the long game. That's what these families understand that most people don't. You are not separate from the system. You are a node in it. Your success or failure ripples. And if you design your decisions to strengthen the network instead of just extracting from it, the network becomes your moat. It protects you. It feeds you opportunities. It absorbs your mistakes. So here's what you do right now. Take the biggest financial decision you're facing. Write it down. Then spend 15 minutes mapping who else is affected if it fails. Not if it succeeds. If it fails. Be honest. Be thorough. Then ask yourself, is there a way to redesign this decision so that even failure doesn't destroy the people connected to it? Can you distribute risk? Can you create buffer mechanisms? Can you align incentives so that your success lifts others instead of depending on their loss? If you can answer those questions, you're not just making a decision, you're building architecture. And that's what separates families that stay wealthy for generations from people who make money once and lose it. The question isn't magic. It's a diagnostic tool. But it only works if you actually ask it. Out loud. Ideally with another person. Because the act of speaking it forces you to think systemically instead of individually. This is what I teach in the full course. We go through historical case studies. We map real decisions. We build the frameworks that these families used in private, and we make them actionable for you today. Not theory, blueprints. The link is in the description. This isn't for everyone. It's for people who understand that wealth isn't about winning. It's about building systems that don't break. The question is 4 words, but the families who ask it control trillions, and they've been asking it for 200 years.